Hey, welcome back to Dan's Chess Lounge, everyone. So today we have the start of the Norway Chess Championship, and it's a very strong field. You have Magnus Carlsen in it. You have Fabiano Caruana, Hikaru Nakamura, um, Anand's in it, Karyakin, Dean Lorenz. So it's a very strong field. Can't forget about Shaq Mami. So I'm going to give you guys an overview of the best games of the day. And today in round one, there was all draws except for one game. There was a decisive game, and it was between the challenger Fabiano Caruana to the world champion Magnus Carlsen. These two are going to play later on in the year in the World Championship. So this is a good preview of what's to come. So in the game today, Magnus was white. He started off with e4. Fabi played e5. And now you have bishop c4 here. Now Magnus is known to play the bishop's opening here when he wants to avoid big theory battles. The standard move here is, instead of bishop c4, the standard move is knight to f3. And then you can continue on with like a Ruy Lopez here with bishop to b5. Or you can even play maybe like an Italian game with bishop to c4. That's commonly how the pros play these e4 games nowadays. But Fabiano is a big expert in the Petrov or the Russian defense. So a lot of times he'll play knight f6 here. And this will get you into the Petrov defense. And he's booked up in it. That's one of his main defenses against e4. And I think we're going to see a lot of those in the World Championship. But today, Carlsen didn't want to go down that route. I'm sure he's preparing a lot for Fabiano's Petrov. So instead, he played bishop c4 here. The bishop's opening. Knight f6. Here, this attacks the pawn on e4. So Carlsen defends that with d3. Now you have c6. Fabi is preparing to make a big push in the center. He would like to play d5 here. Knight f3. And here you go with d5. Bishop b3 retreats. Bishop b4 check. Bishop blocks the check there. Now you have an exchange of the dark squared bishops. The knight is developed. And you have a5 here. So Fabi is expanding on the queen side here. And if just to point out, if Carlsen does get careless or falls asleep on the board, if Fabi can get a4 in here, then the bishop, this light square bishop, will be trapped. But of course, Carlsen is not going to fall for such simple tactics there. So he plays c3, gives his bishop a flight square, and it also allows Carlsen to play d4 if he wants to sometime in the near future. Knight b d7. So now you have e takes d, c takes d, and now you have a change in the pawn structure here. And I just want to note that if you look at Fabiano's pawns here, these are called hanging pawns here because they're kind of just hanging out there by themselves. They're not supported by any other pawns around them. And usually there's a principle that goes along with hanging pawns, is that if they are together here, then they are a strength. They're a pro. But if you can force one of them to move, then they're not as strong anymore, and they're actually a weakness. So right now they're occupying a lot of squares in the center here. They have control over all of these squares here. But once they move, though, then their strength goes away. So, of course, Magnus is going to try to break them up. So he castles. And here you have both players have castled. The game is roughly even. We're starting to go into the middle game now. They're getting out of the opening. White's position here is a little bit better just because his major and minor pieces are better placed. Fabiano his light square bishop here is not very good at all for the moment. It's still asleep and undeveloped. Rook e1. So now you have two attackers on the e pawn. So Fabi defends that with rook e8. Now you have knight to f1 and b5. You have some queenside expansion going on here. You may have a4 coming, but really now you have a place for this light square bishop to go. And then once the bishop gets on b7, it's going to be beautifully placed, eyeing x-raying all the way through to white's camp over here. So you have a4. This is a typical way of breaking up the pawn expansion on the queen side. b4, c takes b, a takes b. And again, if we stop and evaluate the position right here, you can see that the material is even, but white has some targets here that he can go after. He can go after this isolated b pawn right here. He can still break up these two hanging pawns in the center. So the position is still a little bit easier for white to play. Knight e3. Now you have two attackers on the d5 pawn. So now Fabi defends it and he puts that bishop on a beautiful diagonal there on b7. d4. Magnus is continuing with his plan. He's going to attack these hanging pawns in the center. And see, there we go. He forced one of them to move. So they're no longer a strength anymore. So he forced one of them to move. They're not taking up as many squares and controlling as many squares now in the center. So now you have knight e5 here. Carlsen is going to give up some material here temporarily. You have knight takes knight, pawn takes, and now you have rook captures pawn. So Magnus gave up a pawn here in the center, but he's going to have some compensation for it though. Right here, queen d4. So right here there's a lot going on. You have three attackers here, the knight, queen, and bishop, all attacking the pawn here on d5. Magnus is attacking the rook here with his queen, and you can't forget about this b pawn right here. That's also being attacked. So like I said, he gave up some material temporarily, but he's eventually going to get something for it though. So he retreats the rook there, rook e7. Now you have rook ac1. Magnus is doing a great job of getting all of his pieces into the game. He's not concerned about getting the material back instantly. More important is development of his pieces. Rook d7, rook ed1. Everyone is starting to key in on this d5 square here. h6. This gives his king some luck, but it's also like a waiting move. He's waiting to see what Magnus is going to do. Rook c5. This is a great move here. This puts more pressure on his d5 square. Now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you have 5 pieces attacking the d5 square. So Fabi plays a good move here. He plays rook a5, and that's attempting to remove one of the attackers of that d5 square. And Magnus takes, queen takes, h3. This also gives Magnus a little lift. A king h7 here, rook c1, rook c7. Rooks come off the board, and now Magnus finally captures that pawn on b4. So now he's got these two passed pawns here, the A and B pawns. That's huge because they're passed, and I can already tell that they're going to be off to the races. The pawns are going to speed up the board here. Fabi also has two pawns in the center. One of them is passed. This one is not passed yet, but this one here is passed. But it's a lot harder. Just looking at the position, which side would you rather play? White has these two pawns over here that's unobstructed and can run up the board, whereas Black's two pawns in the center, it's going to be a lot tougher job getting these pawns to promote. A lot tougher. So you have queen c1, check. Bishop d1 blocks that. Bishop a6. The bishop would like to come to this e2 square and attempt to pick off this bishop here on d1. Queen d4. And there you go. Bishop e2. The king goes to h2. Bishop takes. Knight takes. Queen c7, check. The king goes back to g1. And now you have queen c1, which is pinning the knight here. b4. The pawns is off to the races. Magnus plays b4, and he's got these two beautiful passed pawns here. And you know what Aaron Nimzovich said? He said passed pawns are to be pushed. It's going to be a lot harder for black to do anything with his two pawns in the center. So Fabi comes up with this idea here of trying to get more active. Then he says, well, if I can't do anything with these pawns in the center, maybe I can get some activity with them. So he plays e3 here. Magnus accepts the sacrifice. He plays f takes e. Now he plays knight e4. So this pawn here, he's going to give it up. Magnus again accepts it. So Fabi just gave up both of his central pawns. Both of them. For what? What is he going to get out of it? Well, he's planning on getting some activity for it, getting some counterplay for it. So he plays knight d2. And this looks like a very dominating move here, because the knight here is unprotected right now and is pinned to the king. But Magnus comes up with queen f5 check. The king goes back to h8, and now you have queen g4, which saves the knight. He saved the knight there. Now you have f5, queen e2, knight e4. Queen e1, which protects this pawn here on b4. So, evaluating the position, Fabi gave up both of his central pawns for some activity. Right now, it doesn't look like he got anything for it. Now it just looks like he's down two pawns. Two outside pass pawns at that. Let's see what happens. Queen a1, it hits the a pawn. a5, knight d6. Again, Fabiano looks like he came out of that variation without any compensation. How is he going to continue? Queen d2. Knight c4 hits the queen. Queen d4. Of course, Magnus would like a queen trade because he's up two outside pass pawns. So Fabi doesn't do that. He plays queen c1. Now he's attacking this pawn here on e3. King f1. Magnus wants to get his king into a better position, and Fabi is able to pick up some material here. He's able to pick off the pawn, the e3 pawn. So he gets some material back. The knights come off the board. And if we stop and evaluate the position here, Fabi is down one pawn, but it's a huge pawn, and Magnus has these two outside passers that is going to be very hard to stop. They're already halfway down the board. They're halfway up the board here already. So Magnus clearly has a winning position here. Let's see if he's going to be able to finish him off. King f2, king c2 check, king g3. Now you have g5. It's a little tricky here. If Magnus falls asleep on the board, or if he has a brain fart, then he could fall to this fork here. If he's able to get, if Fabi's able to get f4 in, forking the king and queen, but Magnus is not going to fall for a simple tactics like this. He plays queen e5 check, king h7. The king goes back. Magnus tucks his king back into the corner nice and safely. f4, queen d5, queen a4, which threatens the pawn there on b4. But you have queen f7. Black's king is just so exposed, super exposed. King h8. So Magnus says, well, if you go ahead and pick off the pawn over here, then I'm going to pick off your pawns on your king side. So you have queen captures b4, queen captures h6 check, king g8, queen captures g5 check, king h7, queen h5 check. And now the players repeat moves a couple times. But this is totally a win for Magnus Carlsen. He's just collecting the starts here. He's evaluating the position. He is not going to go for a threefold repetition, being up 2 pawns, and 2 of them are passed pawns. So you have h4 here. No perpetual check for Fabi. So around this time right here, the commentators were wanting, one of them specifically was wanting Fabiano to resign here, because he was saying that he's down 2 pawns. This is a hopeless game. There's no way that he's going to be able to pull this out. And he felt like Fabiano was wasting more energy than he needed to. He felt like Fabi should just go on ahead, resign, and save his energy for the rest of the tournament. I don't know. What do you think? Fabi is hoping on a perpetual check here. He's hoping that, he can get this f3 move in. Maybe the king goes back to g1. Maybe there's still a chance for a perpetual check if Carlsen allows it. So he's continuing on, which is totally in his right to do. Queen h5 check, king g7, queen g5 check, king h7, and now you have h5. Carlsen pushed h5 here. And now you have this f3 move that Fabi can play, check, allowing the pawn here to maybe escape to all the way to f1. So who knows what may happen here. He shouldn't resign here if he doesn't want to. There's still play left in the game. f3 check, g3 blocks that. Now you have f2, queen g6. Magnus Carlsen forces a queen trade right here. Is it time for Fabiano to resign yet? What would you do? Well, Fabi said, no thank you very much. He plays king h8. Magnus takes the queen on d6, but then Fabi makes a new queen here with f1. So Fabi is still holding on to this idea of getting some type of perpetual check here. They asked Magnus Carlsen in the press conference what he thought about Caruana not resigning, even at this point. And Carlsen said that nowadays people don't resign unless it's absolutely written on the wall. So he said it's a new day and age where people just don't do that. And he said that even if it was him, he wouldn't have resigned. Even if there's only a 1% chance that he can come back, he said he would still play for that 1% chance. So you have queen h6 check, king g8, queen e6 check, king h8, queen e3, come back to play a little defense, queen b5, attacking the pawn on a5. Now you have queen c3, and now Carlsen comes up with this cool little way of walking his a pawn up the board here. So you have king h7, g4, and Magnus' idea is to say to heck with these perpetual check ideas. What he plans on doing is just pushing his pawns up the board and getting his king out to the open, to where his own queen can defend it if necessary, if need be, and eventually Magnus will be able to force some type of a queen trade. So his plan is to push these pawns, and eventually Black will have to give up his queen for the pawn, one of the pawns. Queen d5, queen c7 check, king g8, king g3, queen e6, queen d8 check, king h7, queen d3 check, king h8, and now the pawn goes up to a6. So Magnus found this little cool way of walking his A pawn up the board through checks. Queen e5 check. The king goes to safety to h4. Queen a1. And trying to stop the pawn from moving up the board. And at this time, the commentator, GM Simon Agdestein, was clearly frustrated with Fabi for not resigning yet. And I just have to say that Agdestein is biased because for a long time he's been Magnus Carlsen's manager. So he is not coming from a non-biased perspective. He wants Fabi to resign, and he wants Carlsen to win all of his games. So it wasn't really fair for him to keep pointing out that Fabi should resign over and over again. Queen d8 check, king h7, queen e7 check, king h6, queen e3, and now the pawn can push one more square. So this was a really neat way of pushing the pawn up the board through checks. And then right here, Fabi finally resigned because Carlsen was going to do that same trick again. He was going to check the king and get his queen onto the square, this e4 square, which protects the promotion square for the pawn. And so then eventually the black queen would have had to sacrifice itself, and then Carlsen would have been left with these two pawns over here, clear and easy victory. So Fabi went ahead and resigned at this point. So Fabi was disappointed. He didn't show up for the final press conference, the post-round press conference. But Carlsen was in good spirits, of course, because he won. And even Carlsen kept saying that he wouldn't have resigned. He would have kept playing on, even if there was a 1% chance. He would have continued on. So I was a little disappointed that there's a commentator that's supposed to be non-biased, and he keeps pointing out how Fabi should just go ahead and resign, even though we all know that this guy is Magnus Carlsen's manager. So I was a little put off by that, but it was a good game by Magnus. Fabi went astray in that middle game when he went for those two pawn sacrifices. He sacked his e pawn and his d pawn for activity, and he really didn't get anything for it. And when you give Magnus Carlsen two pawns, you better have something concrete that's going to work. So that was a good preview of the World Championship that's coming up later on this year. So we'll see what happens. Of course, it's going to be different then because Fabi is going to be playing all of his preparation. And so it's going to be a little bit different. And also in this game here, Fabi not resigning could have been a little psychological gamesmanship. He might have wanted to show Carlsen that he's not going to just throw in the towel and give up easy. He's going to make him beat him. He's going to play everything out to the very, very end. So, okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys in round 2.